Today we recognize a quiet hero whose courage and dedication reflect the highest traditions.
On December 7th, 1941, at precisely 7:55 a.m., a man who wasn't allowed to touch a gun would shoot down 4 Japanese aircraft in 23 minutes. His name was Dory Miller, and the U.S. Navy had assigned him one job washing dishes and collecting laundry for white officers. But when Pearl Harbor exploded into hell, this 6'3" mess attendant from Waco, Texas would prove that courage doesn't ask for permission, and heroism doesn't check the color of your skin first. Dory's hands moved through the breakfast plates, stack wipe stack again. Faster. Always faster. 6 feet, 200 pounds of pure muscle, and the United States Navy had given him one mission: don't let the officer's eggs get cold. Miller, where's my coffee? Coming, sir? He poured. He smiled. He disappeared back into the kitchen like he was supposed to, like he'd been doing every single day since he stepped onto the USS West Virginia 2 years ago. This was December 6th, 1941. Just another Saturday in paradise. Just another day of being invisible. But Dory wasn't always invisible. 10 years earlier, he was somebody. Waco, Texas, McLennan County. Friday night lights blazing down on the A.J. Moore High School football field. Dory Miller, fullback number 34, crashing through defensive lines like they were made of paper. His teammates chanted his name. The crowd roared. For those 2 hours every Friday, he wasn't just another black kid from the cotton fields. He was a warrior. His coach grabbed him after one game, eyes bright with excitement. "Miller, you've got something special. Real special." "Thank you, coach. I mean it. You could go places with this." Dory looked at his coach's face and saw the truth. Neither of them wanted to say out loud there were no places to go. Not in 1938. Not in Texas. Not for someone who looked like him. He went home that night to the 2-room house his family rented on the edge of town. His father, Connery, sat on the porch smoking a cigarette in the dark. Dory sat next to him. "Played good tonight." "Yes, sir." "Good ain't enough, son." His father didn't look at him, just stared out at the cotton field stretching into the darkness. "You can be the best football player in the whole state. Won't matter. They don't let our kind go further." "I know." "You don't know. Not yet." His father finally turned to face him. "You think being strong makes you safe. It don't. It just makes you a bigger target." Dory didn't answer. What could he say? His father had picked cotton for 40 years. His back was bent, his hands were scarred, and he'd never owned a single thing except the clothes on his back. That wasn't going to be Dory's story. It couldn't be. 1 year later, September 1939, Dory pushed open the door to the Navy recruiting office in Waco. The recruiter was a white man in his 50s, belly hanging over his belt, barely glancing up from his paperwork. "Help you." "I want to enlist, sir." Now the recruiter looked up. His eyes traveled from Dory's face down to his feet and back up again. "That right?" "Yes, sir. I want to serve my country." The recruiter pulled out a form. Didn't ask about Dory's education. Didn't ask about his football career or his work ethic or anything else. Just checked one box with his pen. "Messman branch. Only placement available for coloreds." Dory stared at that word. Messman. He knew what it meant. Cook, cleaner, servant. The recruiter slid the form across the desk. "You still want to sign?" Every instinct screamed at Dory to walk out, but he thought about the cotton fields. He thought about his father's bent back. He thought about spending the rest of his life in Waco picking cotton until his body gave out just like every other black man he'd ever known. He picked up the pen. "Yes, sir," his mother cried when he told her. His father just nodded like he'd been expecting it. His younger brother, James, asked if Dory would get to shoot guns and fight bad guys. "Maybe," Dory lied. "Maybe one day." Naval Training Station, Norfolk, Virginia, October 1939. Dory learned quickly what messman really meant. While white recruits trained with rifles and learned navigation and practiced battle drills, Dory learned how to fold a napkin into 8 different shapes. He learned how to serve soup without spilling a drop. He learned how to say yes, sir, and right away, sir, and my apologies, sir, without letting his face show what he was thinking. One instructor, a petty officer with a thick Southern accent, pulled Dory aside after a particularly brutal session. "You're a big boy, Miller, real big." "Thank you, sir." "Shame you people can't be trusted with real Navy work." The officer smiled. "But I guess somebody's got to wash the dishes, right?" Dory's jaw clenched. His fists tightened at his sides. The officer noticed. "You got something to say, boy." Every muscle in Dory's body wanted to move, wanted to show this smug bastard what real strength looked like. But his father's words echoed in his head. "Being strong just makes you a bigger target." "No, sir. Nothing to say." "Good. Dismissed." That night, Dory lay in his bunk and wondered if he'd made a terrible mistake. Around him, other black recruits whispered their own stories of humiliation. Roosevelt Williams from Alabama, Freddie Jackson from Georgia, Leonard Harmon from Texas, just like Dory. They were all messmen, all servants, all invisible. "You ever think about quitting?" Freddie asked into the darkness. "Every day," Dory admitted. "But you don't." "No." "Why not?" Dory thought about that. "Because they want us to quit, and I don't give people what they want." Freddie laughed quietly. "Stubborn. Stubborn enough." January 1940. Dory transferred to the USS West Virginia. The battleship was massive, 608 feet long, 8 16-inch guns armor, plating thick enough to stop anything short of a nuclear bomb. She was beautiful. She was powerful. And Dory's battle station was 3 decks below the waterline. In the ammunition magazine loading shells, he would never fire for guns he would never touch. His first week aboard a young ensign couldn't have been more than 22 stopped him in the passageway. "You're Miller, right? The new mess man." "Yes, sir." "I need my uniform pressed for inspection tomorrow. Make sure the creases are sharp." "Yes, sir." The ensign started to walk away, then paused. "You play sports, Miller. You look like you play sports." Something sparked in Dory's chest. "Football, sir. Fullback. Back in Texas." "Yeah." The ensign actually looked interested. "Any good?" "I was decent, sir." "Decent. Right." The ensign nodded, then his face closed off again, remembering who he was talking to. "Well, anyway, the uniform. Sharp creases." "Yes, sir." That was it. That was the closest anyone had come to seeing Dory as something other than a servant in months. He went to the laundry room and pressed that uniform until the creases could cut glass. The months blurred together. Wake up, serve breakfast, clean the officers' quarters, serve lunch, do laundry, serve dinner, clean the galley, sleep, repeat. The USS West Virginia sailed to different ports, San Diego, Long Beach, back to Pearl Harbor. Dory saw the world through porthole windows and brief moments of shore leave. He sent money home to his parents. He wrote letters to his brothers. He waited for something, anything to change. It didn't. December 6th, 1941, Saturday evening. Dory finished his shift and sat down with Freddie and Leonard in the mess deck. They played cards, poker, 5-card draw using matchsticks as chips because real gambling was against regulations. "You going on Liberty tomorrow?" Freddie asked, dealing the cards. "Nah, saving my money." Dory studied his hand. "You, church service on base, might as well get right with God, you know." Leonard snorted. "God ain't paying attention to what happens down here, brother. If he was, we wouldn't be washing white men's socks for a living." "Don't talk like that," Freddie said quietly. "Things change, just takes time." "How much time?" Leonard's voice rose. "My granddaddy was a slave. My daddy was a sharecropper. Now I'm a servant in a uniform. 3 generations and nothing changed except the name they call us." Dory threw down 2 cards, drew 2 more. "It'll change." "You really believe that?" "I have to." Leonard shook his head. "You're a fool, Dory Miller." "Maybe, but I'm a stubborn fool." They finished the game in silence. Dory won with 3 aces. He collected his matchsticks like they were gold coins and went to his bunk. Around him, dozens of sailors settled in for the night. Some wrote letters, some read magazines. Someone had a radio playing swing music barely audible over the sound of the ship's ventilation system. Dory pulled out his own paper and pen. Started a letter home. "Dear Mama, I hope this finds you and Daddy well. Everything here is fine. The ship is good. The food is decent. I'm saving money like I promised." He paused. What else could he say? That he spent his days being treated like furniture, that his dreams of proving himself had turned into folding napkins and scrubbing floors, that sometimes he lay awake at night wondering if his father had been right, that being strong just made you a bigger target. He couldn't write that. So he wrote what she wanted to hear. "I'm making the family proud. Tell James to stay in school. Tell the others I said hello. I'll write again soon. Love, Doris." He sealed the envelope, put it in his locker, lay back on his bunk and stared at the metal ceiling 6 inches above his face. Tomorrow was Sunday, day of rest. Maybe he'd sleep in. Maybe he'd... The ship's alarm exploded through the silence. 7 short blasts. 1 long blast. General quarters. All hands to battle stations. Dory's heart stopped, then restarted pounding like a drum. Around him, sailors were already moving, grabbing life jackets, running for their stations. This was a drill. Had to be a drill. They did drills all the time. But drills didn't come with the sound of explosions. Dory rolled out of his bunk and hit the deck running. The passageway was chaos, men shouting, lights flickering, the entire ship shuddering with impact after impact. He pushed through the crowd, heading for his battle station in the magazine. The floor tilted beneath his feet. Water was rushing in somewhere below. That couldn't be right. They were anchored in Pearl Harbor. They were safe. They were another explosion closer this time. The lights went out completely. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. Dory reached the ladder leading down to the magazine and found it blocked by rushing water. The compartment was flooding. His battle station was gone. He reversed course, fighting against the tide of sailors trying to escape the lower decks. A young kid, couldn't have been more than 18, slipped and went down in the water. Dory grabbed him by the collar, hauled him up, shoved him toward the ladder. "Move, go!" The kid scrambled up. Dory followed, his mind racing. If his battle station was compromised, he needed orders. He needed to find an officer. He emerged onto the main deck, and the world turned into hell. Pearl Harbor was burning. The USS Arizona, just 2 berths forward, was gone completely. Gone, replaced by a mushroom cloud of fire and smoke rising 1,000 feet into the sky. The USS Oklahoma was rolling over her hull, breaching the surface like a dying whale, men scrambling across her side, trying to find safety. Oil fires spread across the water. Bodies floated face down in the harbor. And overhead planes, dozens of planes, circled and dove and strafed with machine guns, the red circles on their wings unmistakable. Japan. Japan was attacking. They were at war. Miller. Someone grabbed his arm. Lieutenant Commander Johnson, the communications officer, his face black with smoke. "The captain's hit. We need stretcher bearers." Dory didn't hesitate. He ran toward the bridge, dodging debris and flames. Captain Mervyn Bennion lay on the deck, his abdomen torn open by shrapnel. Blood pooled beneath him. His eyes were unfocused, but he was still talking, still trying to give orders. "Counterflooding. Port side. Stop the list." "We've got you, sir." Dory knelt beside him. "We're going to move you. The ship. Save the ship." 2 other sailors appeared with a stretcher. They lifted Bennion as gently as possible. The captain gasped in pain but never stopped talking. They carried him to a more sheltered position, but Dory could see the truth: Bennion was dying. The captain knew it too. He grabbed Dory's arm with surprising strength. "Get the men out. Lower decks. They're trapped." "Yes, sir." "That's an order, sailor." "Yes, sir." Dory ran back toward the interior passages. Smoke poured from the hatches. He could hear screaming from below, men trapped in flooding compartments, men injured and unable to climb, men who would die if someone didn't reach them fast. He went in. The smoke was thick enough to choke. The heat from fires somewhere deeper in the ship was intense. Dory felt his way along the bulkheads, calling out. "Anyone here? Sound off. Here. We're here." He followed the voices. Found 3 sailors trapped behind a jammed hatch. Dory grabbed the wheel, threw his entire weight into it. The metal was hot enough to burn his hands, but he didn't let go. The wheel turned. The hatch opened. The sailors stumbled out. Go topside, now. He made 3 more trips, pulled out 7 men total. One of them was missing a leg. Dory carried him on his shoulders, the man's blood soaking into his uniform. He didn't care. He just kept moving. On his 4th trip up, he passed the anti-aircraft battery. One of the 50 caliber Browning machine guns sat unmanned. Its crew lay dead around it. Above them, Japanese planes dove in for another attack run. Dory stopped. He'd never fired a gun in his life, never been trained, never been allowed, but the gun was right there. The planes were right there, and he was standing on a burning ship in the middle of a war. Ensign Delano appeared next to him, breathing hard. Miller, can you operate this? I don't know, sir. Can you try? Dory looked at the gun, looked at the sky, looked at Delano. Yes, sir, I can try. He grabbed the handles. The metal was hot from previous firing. Delano showed him quickly. Here's the ammunition belt. Here's how you charge it. Here's the trigger aim through this sight. It took 30 seconds. Then Delano was gone, called away to other emergencies. Dory was alone with the weapon. A Japanese Val-dive bomber pulled out of its attack run 200 feet above the harbor, climbing banking, coming around for another pass. Dory tracked it with the gun. His hands felt clumsy. His heart hammered. Every voice in his head screamed that he didn't know what he was doing, that he'd been trained to cook, not fight, that this wasn't his place. Then he thought about Captain Bennion bleeding out on the deck, about the kid he'd pulled from the water, about his brothers down in the mess deck, about 2 years of being told he wasn't good enough to touch a weapon. He squeezed the trigger. The gun roared. The recoil slammed into his shoulders like a mule kick. Tracers streamed toward the aircraft in a bright arc. Dory adjusted his aim, walking the fire toward the target. The tracers connected. Pieces flew off the plane's wing. It wobbled, smoking, and veered away. Dory didn't celebrate. He was already tracking the next target. Another dive bomber, coming in fast and low. He let it squeezed, fired. The tracers reached out like fingers of light. The plane's canopy shattered. It pitched forward, nose down, and slammed into the harbor in an explosion of water and burning fuel. That's 1. Delano had returned, feeding ammunition. Keep firing. Dory kept firing. A Zero fighter strafed the deck, machine guns blazing. Dory swung the gun and returned fire. The Zero banked hard, trailing smoke from its engine. Another bomber dove toward the USS Tennessee. Dory tracked it, fired, watched his rounds tear into its fuselage. The plane's bomb fell short, exploding harmlessly in the water. Time disappeared. There was only the gun, the targets, the constant roar of battle. His shoulders burned from the recoil. His hands were raw from gripping the hot metal. The ammunition belt fed through the weapon in an endless stream. The barrel glowed red hot. He didn't stop. A Val bomber came straight at the West Virginia, diving, almost vertically, bomb clearly visible under its belly. Dory tracked it, led it, fired. The tracers climbed toward the plane like a ladder of light. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the bomber exploded in midair, a massive fireball that lit up the smoke-filled sky. Debris rained down across the harbor. You got him, Delano was shouting. But Dory was already tracking the next target, and the next, and the next. He didn't know he was making history. He just knew that for the first time in 2 years, for the first time since he'd put on the uniform, he was fighting. Really fighting. Not serving. Not cleaning, not staying in his place. He was a warrior again, and the enemy would learn what that meant. The ammunition belt ran dry with a metallic click that cut through the chaos like silence. Dory's hands moved automatically to reload, but Delano grabbed his shoulder. We're out! Magazines flooded! Dory stared at the empty gun. His ears rang from the sustained firing. His shoulders screamed in pain. The barrel glowed orange-red heat waves shimmering off the metal. Around him, Pearl Harbor burned like the end of the world. But overhead, the sky was clearing. The Japanese planes were pulling back, regrouping, heading back to their carriers. How long had he been firing? 5 minutes 10. He had no idea. Time had fractured into individual moments. Target aim, fire. Target aim, fire. Now in the sudden lull, Reality crashed back. "Sir, how many did we—" "I counted 4, Delano said, his face black with smoke and streaked with sweat. 4 confirmed. Maybe more damaged. I don't know. Miller, where the hell did you learn to shoot like that?" "I didn't, sir." Dory's voice sounded strange in his own ears, distant. I just did it." Delano laughed a sharp, almost hysterical sound. "You just did it. Jesus Christ, sailor. You just shot down 4 Japanese planes and you've never even held a gun before." "No, sir. Messmen aren't trained for. I know what messmen are trained for." Delano's expression shifted, something like shame crossing his face. "I know exactly what they're trained for, and it's not this." He gestured at the gun, at the sky, at the carnage around them. "What's your name again?" "Miller, sir. Doris Miller." "Well, Miller, you just became a goddamn war hero." Delano extended his hand. After a moment of shock, white officers didn't shake hands with black messmen. Dory took it. Delano's grip was firm. "Thank you." Before Dory could respond, a shout came from the bridge. "We need damage control teams. She's listing 28 degrees. We're going down." The handshake broke. Delano ran toward the voice. Dory followed his legs, moving before his brain could process the order. The USS West Virginia was dying. Water poured into the torn hull from 7 torpedo hits. The ship had settled onto the harbor bottom, but she was listing hard to port, threatening to capsize like the Oklahoma had. If she rolled over, hundreds of men still trapped below would die. Dory reached the damage control station where Lieutenant Claude Ricketts was coordinating counter-flooding operations. Ricketts looked up, saw Dory, and pointed without hesitation. "You big guy, we need to open the starboard valves. Flood the compartments on the other side to level her out. Can you get down there?" "Where, sir?" "Third deck, starboard side, forward compartments. The passageways are flooded waist deep and full of smoke. You'll need to feel your way through in the dark." It was a death sentence. Everyone knew it. The ship was on fire. Bulkheads were collapsing. Toxic smoke filled the lower decks. Men were dying down there, trying to escape, not trying to go deeper in. Dory looked at Ricketts. "Which valves, sir?" Ricketts showed him on a diagram, pointing out the valve wheels that needed to be opened to flood specific compartments. "Here, here, and here. Open them all the way. It's the only chance we have to keep her from rolling." "Understood, sir." "Miller," Ricketts hesitated. "I won't order you to do this. It's volunteer only." Dory thought about his father's words being strong, just makes you a bigger target. He thought about 2 years of being invisible, of being told his only value was serving coffee and folding laundry. He thought about the gun he'd just fired, about the planes he'd brought down, about what it felt like to finally be seen as something more than a servant. "I volunteer, sir." 3 other sailors stepped forward. Reynolds, a white kid from Ohio. Patterson, another messman, black like Dory. And Kowalski, a machinist's mate who'd been blown off his battle station by the first torpedo hit. They grabbed flashlights, though the lights were almost useless in the smoke. They grabbed tools. They went down. The ladder descended into darkness. The emergency lighting had failed on the 3rd deck. Water rushed past them knee-deep, then waist-deep cold, despite the fires burning somewhere nearby. The smoke was thick enough to touch, filling their lungs with every breath. Dory led the way, one hand on the bulkhead, feeling for the valve station. "Can't see shit." Reynolds coughed violently. "Don't need to see," Dory said. "Just need to move." They felt their way forward. The ship groaned around them, metal screaming, as the structure twisted under impossible stress. Somewhere in the darkness, someone was calling for help, a weak voice getting weaker. They didn't have time to search. Every second counted. If the ship rolled, everyone died. Dory's hand found the first valve wheel. "Here, Reynolds, help me." They grabbed the wheel together and turned. The valve was corroded, stuck, refusing to move. Dory planted his feet and threw his full weight into it. The wheel gave with a screech of protesting metal. Water began rushing through the open valve, flooding the starboard compartments. One down move. They pushed deeper into the smoke. Patterson stumbled, went down in the water, came up, gasping. Kowalski grabbed him, kept him moving. The second valve was 30 feet forward. They felt their way along the bulkhead, stepping over debris they couldn't see, wading through water that was rising by the inch. There. Patterson's flashlight caught the valve for just a second before the bulb died, but it was enough. Dory found it, grabbed the wheel, turned. This one opened easier, more water flooding in. The ship was getting heavier, settling deeper, but the list was starting to correct. It was working. "Last one," Dory shouted. "Keep moving." The third valve was forward in the most damaged section of the ship. They pushed through a twisted hatchway, the metal bent inward from torpedo impact. The water here was deeper chest high now, and getting higher. Dory could feel the current pulling at him, trying to drag him down into flooded compartments where men had drowned in the first minutes of the attack. His hand found the valve. He turned it. Nothing happened. He tried again, putting everything he had into it. The wheel didn't move. It stuck. Reynolds was panicking now. "We need to go back. The water's too high." "Wait." Kowalski pulled out a pipe wrench from his tool belt. "Try this." Dory fitted the wrench onto the valve wheel, used it as a lever, pushed. The metal groaned. His muscles screamed. The water was at his shoulders now. In another minute, it would be over their heads. "Come on." He pushed harder. The valve wheel moved just a fraction of an inch, but it moved. He kept pushing. Reynolds and Patterson grabbed the wrench too, adding their weight. Kowalski braced against the bulkhead, giving them leverage. The wheel turned. The valve opened. Water rushed in with a roar. "Go, go, go!" Dory shouted. They scrambled back the way they'd come, fighting against the current. The water was at their necks now. Patterson lost his footing again. Dory grabbed him by the collar, kept him above water. They reached the hatchway, pulled themselves through, found the ladder, climbed. They emerged onto the main deck, gasping, coughing, collapsing on the hot metal. Dory's lungs burned. His vision swam. But through the smoke and fire, he could see it. The ship's list was correcting. The West Virginia was still sinking, but she was sinking level, settling onto the bottom upright instead of rolling over. Lieutenant Ricketts appeared above them. "Did you get them, all three valves?" Dory could barely speak. "Yes, sir. All three." "You magnificent bastards." Ricketts was grinning, tears cutting tracks through the soot on his face. "You saved the ship. You saved everyone still alive on board." Around them, the first wave of attack had ended, but the fires still raged. The USS Arizona was gone, sunk with over 1,000 men trapped inside her. The USS Oklahoma had capsized. The USS California was sinking. The USS Nevada, attempting to escape the harbor, was grounded and burning. Across Ford Island, aircraft hangars were destroyed. At Hickam Field, planes burned on the runway. The Pacific Fleet had been gutted in less than 2 hours. But the West Virginia was still there. Damaged, burning, but upright. Hundreds of men were still alive who would have died if the ship had rolled. And they were alive because 4 sailors had volunteered to go into hell and open some valves. "All right," Ricketts said, pulling himself together. "We need to evacuate wounded and fight these fires. Miller, you're with the stretcher detail again." Dory pushed himself to his feet. His body screamed in protest. He ignored it. "Yes, sir." For the next 3 hours, he carried wounded men off the burning ship. Some could walk with assistance. Some had to be carried on stretchers. Some were so badly burned that Dory had to look away, fighting the urge to vomit. He made trip after trip across the gangway to Ford Island, where medical personnel were setting up emergency triage stations. On one trip, he passed a young sailor sitting on the dock, staring at nothing. The kid's uniform was shredded, his face blank with shock. Dory recognized him. It was the 18-year-old he'd pulled from the water during the first minutes of the attack. "You okay, son?" The kid looked up. Recognition dawned slowly. You pulled me out, down below." "That's right. I couldn't breathe. The water was..." The kid's voice broke. "Thank you. I didn't get to say thank you." "You don't need to thank me." "Yes, I do." The kid stood up, swaying slightly. "My name's Johnson, William Johnson, from Indiana. I'm 19 years old and I should be dead right now, but I'm not, because of you." Dory didn't know what to say. He'd spent 2 years being invisible, and now people kept thanking him, kept seeing him. It felt surreal. "Just doing my job," he finally said. "No." Johnson shook his head firmly. No, you weren't. Your job is mess duty. Kitchen work. That's what they told you, right? But today you manned a gun. You went below decks when everyone else was coming up. You saved my life. That's not a job. That's something else. What is it then? Johnson thought about that. I guess it's being a sailor. A real one. A real one. Dory carried those words with him through the rest of the day, as he pulled more wounded from the wreckage, as he fought fires alongside white sailors who suddenly didn't care about his skin color. As night fell over Pearl Harbor and the fire still burned, turning the darkness red and orange. Captain Bennion died that afternoon. They'd gotten him to the hospital on shore, but his wounds were too severe. His last words, according to the doctors, were about his ship and his crew. Dory heard the news and felt something crack inside his chest. Bennion had been one of the good ones, not perfect, but decent. He'd treated his crew fairly regardless of color, and now he was gone killed while trying to save his ship. Around midnight, Dory finally stopped moving. He sat on the dock with Patterson and Freddie. Both had survived and stared at the burning harbor. The USS Arizona was still burning. She would burn for 2 more days. Over 1,000 men were entombed inside her twisted wreckage. How many do you think we lost? Freddie asked quietly. Too many, Patterson said. They sat in silence. Behind them, the medical stations were overwhelmed with wounded. The count was still incomplete, but already they knew over 2,000 dead. Nearly as many wounded. 18 ships sunk or damaged. Almost 200 aircraft destroyed. The Pacific Fleet had been decimated. What happens now? Freddie's voice was small, scared. Now, Patterson lit a cigarette with shaking hands. Now we're at war. Dory thought about the gun, about the feeling of finally fighting back, about Captain Bennion's last order, save the ship, about young William Johnson saying, "You're a real sailor." Good, he said quietly. Patterson and Freddie both turned to look at him. Good, Freddie repeated. Dory, we just got our asses handed to us. How is that good? Because now they can't pretend anymore. Dory's voice was steady, certain. For 2 years they told me I wasn't good enough to fight. Told all of us we weren't soldiers, just servants. But today, when it mattered, we fought. We saved lives. We brought down enemy planes. And they saw it. Everyone saw it. One saw. You think that'll change anything? Patterson sounded skeptical. It has to. Dory looked at his hands. They were raw, blistered from the hot gun covered in other men's blood. It has to change something, because I'm not going back to just folding laundry. Not after today. None of us are. Across the harbor, something exploded on the Arizona, another secondary blast from the fires. The flames leaped higher. In their light, Dory could see dozens of other sailors sitting along the waterfront, watching, processing, trying to understand how their world had changed so completely in a single morning. A white officer walked past their group, then stopped and came back. It was Ensign Delano. He looked exhausted, his uniform filthy, his eyes red from smoke. "Miller," he said, "I just filed my report on the gun action. I put you in for a commendation." Dory stood quickly. "Sir, that's not necessary." "Yes, it is." Delano's voice was firm. 4 confirmed kills. Maybe more. You saved lives today. That deserves recognition. He paused, seeming to struggle with something. "I'm also putting in a recommendation that messmen be allowed weapons training. After what I saw today, it's insane that we've been wasting capable men like you on kitchen duty." "Thank you, sir." Delano nodded and walked away. Freddie let out a low whistle. "Did that just happen?" "I think so," Patterson said. "A commendation," Freddie repeated. "Dory, you might actually get promoted out of mess duty." But Dory wasn't thinking about promotions. He was thinking about all the black sailors who would come after him, all the ones who'd been told they weren't good enough. Maybe, just maybe, today would crack that door open a little wider. Maybe his 23 minutes behind that gun would mean something more than just 4 downed planes. The night wore on. Eventually, exhaustion claimed them. Dory lay down on the dock, using his life jacket as a pillow, and closed his eyes. Around him, Pearl Harbor burned. Above him, stars appeared through gaps in the smoke. And inside him, something had fundamentally changed. He'd been invisible his whole life. Today, for 23 minutes, he'd been impossible to ignore. Tomorrow, the Navy would have to decide what that meant. But tonight, Dory Miller, mess attendant, third-class cook servant, the man who wasn't supposed to touch weapons, slept the sleep of a warrior who'd proven himself in battle. And in the darkness, despite the death and destruction surrounding them, there were hearts that still whispered hope. Dawn broke over Pearl Harbor on December 8, 1941, and the magnitude of the disaster became impossible to ignore. In daylight, the devastation looked worse, somehow more real, more permanent. The USS Arizona's shattered hull jutted from the water like a gravestone. Oil fires still burned on the surface. Bodies were still being recovered. Dory woke on the dock with his entire body screaming. Every muscle ached. His shoulders were so stiff he could barely lift his arms. The burns on his hands had blistered overnight. But when the call came for volunteers to continue rescue operations, he stood up anyway. "Miller, you should get those hands looked at," a corpsman said, gesturing at the medical station. "After," Dory said, "there's still men trapped." The corpsman didn't argue. There were too many wounded, too few hands. Dory joined a work detail pulling sailors from capsized ships. The USS Oklahoma had rolled completely over her hull, exposed to the sky. Inside that hull, men were trapped alive, banging on the metal, screaming to be let out. Rescue crews worked with cutting torches and welding equipment burning through inches of steel to reach the survivors. Dory worked alongside them for hours. The work was brutal, precise, agonizing. Every few minutes they'd stop cutting and listen, trying to hear tapping from inside, trying to figure out where men were trapped. Sometimes they heard responses. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they cut through and found men alive, blinking in the sudden light, weeping with relief. Sometimes they found only bodies. "Here we've got someone." A chief petty officer pressed his ear to the hull. "2 men, maybe 3. They're weak, but alive." The cutting crew moved in. Dory held equipment, cleared debris, pulled men out when openings were made. One sailor emerged after 30 hours, trapped in complete darkness, covered in oil, half-drowned, delirious. He grabbed Dory's arm with desperate strength. "I prayed," the sailor gasped. "I prayed someone would come. I prayed." "You're out now," Dory told him. "You're safe." "We left him. We left Thompson. He was in the next compartment, but we couldn't reach him and the water kept rising and we left him." "Where? Which compartment?" The sailor described the location. Dory relayed it to the cutting crew. They moved to a new position, started cutting again. Dory helped pull the freshly rescued sailor to the medical station, then returned to the work. They cut for another 2 hours before they broke through to the compartment the sailor had described. Thompson was dead. Had been dead for hours, drowned when the compartment flooded. But they pulled his body out anyway, treated it with respect, laid it with the others. The sailor who'd told them where to look broke down completely when he saw Thompson's body. "I should have tried harder. Should have." "You survived," Dory said quietly. "That's what you should have done. Thompson would want you to survive." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Dory's voice was certain. "Because that's what any of us would want. We don't die so our brothers can feel guilty. We die so they can live." The sailor looked at him with red-rimmed eyes. "Who are you?" "Nobody special, just another sailor." But that wasn't true anymore, and Dory was starting to realize it. People kept looking at him differently, kept stopping him to shake his hand, to thank him, to tell him they'd heard about the gun, about the valves, about the rescues. Word spread fast on a military base, and by December 9th, everyone at Pearl Harbor seemed to know the story of the mess attendant who'd shot down Japanese planes. On December 10th, Dory was called to the temporary headquarters Admiral William Pye had set up on shore. He arrived, still wearing his stained, burned uniform. He hadn't had time to get a new one. A yeoman looked him up and down with barely concealed disdain. "You're Miller?" "Yes." "Wait here." The yeoman disappeared into an office. Dory stood in the hallway, acutely aware of the other personnel walking past their clean uniforms, a stark contrast to his filthy one. Some looked at him with curiosity, some with respect, some with the same old contempt he'd seen his whole life. The yeoman returned. "The Admiral will see you now." Dory entered the office. Admiral Pi sat behind a desk covered in reports and maps. He looked exhausted, aged 10 years and 3 days. He glanced up when Dory entered, then did a double take. "You're Miller, the one who manned the anti-aircraft gun." "Yes, sir." Pi studied him for a long moment. "Ensign Delano's report says you shot down 4 confirmed Japanese aircraft. Is that accurate?" "I don't know, sir. I was firing at targets. Some went down. I couldn't say for certain how many were my rounds versus other gunners." "Delano says they were yours. Says you were the only one firing from that position during the critical window." Pi leaned back in his chair. "He also says you'd never fired that weapon before. Never had any gunnery training at all." "That's correct, sir. Messmen don't receive weapons training." "No, they don't." Something flickered across Pi's face, anger maybe or shame. "That's going to change. I'm recommending that all naval personnel receive basic combat training regardless of rating. What happened here proves we can't afford to have any sailor unable to defend their ship." Dory didn't respond, didn't know what to say. "I'm also putting you in for the Navy Cross," Pi continued. "It's the highest decoration we can award for combat valor. You deserve recognition for your actions. The Navy Cross." Dory had heard of it, seen it pinned on officers' uniforms during ceremonies, but never on a black sailor, never on a messman. "Sir, I was just doing what needed to be done." That's what heroes always say. Pi stood, walked around the desk. "Miller, I need you to understand something. What you did on December 7th matters. Not just because you shot down enemy planes or saved lives, though that would be enough. It matters because of who you are. The Navy has failed men like you. We've wasted your potential, treated you as less than you are. That has to change, and your actions are going to help change it. Sir, I know you didn't ask for this. I know you just want to do your job and go home. But like it or not, you're a symbol now. People are going to look at you and see possibility. They're going to ask why we've been restricting capable men from combat roles. You've opened a door, Miller. Now we have to see who walks through it." Dory left the meeting in a daze. The Navy Cross, a recommendation from an admiral, recognition for combat valor. It felt surreal, impossible. 3 days ago, he'd been washing dishes. Now admirals were shaking his hand and talking about changing Navy policy, but not everyone was happy about it. On December 12th, Dory returned to what was left of the USS West Virginia's crew. They'd been reassigned to temporary barracks on Ford Island while the ship underwent emergency repairs. Most of the white sailors treated him with new respect, some genuine, some grudging. But there were others who made their feelings clear. "There's the hero," one sailor said as Dory entered the mess hall. The tone wasn't friendly. "The colored boy who saved us all." Dory kept walking, didn't engage. But the sailor wasn't done. "Heard you're getting the Navy Cross. That's something ain't it never seen a N with a medal before." The mess hall went quiet. Everyone was watching. Dory turned slowly to face the sailor, a second-class petty officer named Morrison from Alabama. Morrison was bigger than most men, but still 4 inches shorter than Dory, and 50 pounds lighter. "You want to finish that word?" Dory asked quietly. Morrison's face flushed red. "You threatening me, boy?" "No threat. Just a question. You started to say something. I want to hear you finish it." Morrison stood up. His buddies grabbed his arms, holding him back. "You ain't worth it," one of them muttered. "He's Admiral's pet now. Can't touch him." "That's right," Morrison spat. "Hide behind the brass. That's all your kind knows how to do." Dory took a step forward. Morrison's friends tightened their grip. Patterson appeared at Dory's elbow, speaking low and urgent. "Don't. He's trying to provoke you. You hit him, they'll court-martial you, medal or no medal." Dory knew Patterson was right, knew that for black sailors the rules were different. A white sailor could throw a punch and get a week's restriction. A black sailor would face serious charges. It had always been that way. But something had changed inside Dory on December 7th. He'd crossed a line he couldn't uncross. He'd stopped being invisible. And invisible men could be ignored, could swallow their anger, could walk away. But heroes were expected to stand up. "I'm not hiding," Dory said, his voice carrying across the silent mess hall. "I'm standing right here. If you've got something to say to me, say it." But when you're done talking, remember this. 3 days ago, when Japanese planes were tearing this base apart, I was on deck fighting. Where were you? Morrison. Morrison's face went from red to purple. I was at my battle station, which was where below decks, in a magazine, somewhere safe. Dory took another step forward. Patterson's hand on his arm was the only thing keeping him from closing the distance completely. I was up top with bullets and bombs falling all around me, firing a gun. I'd never been trained on killing enemy pilots while they tried to kill me. So before you tell me what my kind knows how to do, maybe you should ask yourself what you did while Pearl Harbor burned. I was following orders. So was I. Except my orders were to stay in the kitchen and keep my mouth shut. But when the shooting started, orders didn't matter anymore. Survival mattered. Fighting back mattered. And I did that. Whether you like it or not, whether it fits your ideas about who I'm supposed to be or not, I fought and I won. Dory's voice dropped lower, more intense. You want to have a problem with that? We can take it outside right now. No ranks, no regulations, just you and me. Or you can sit down, finish your meal, and remember that we're on the same side in this war. The silence stretched out. Morrison's friends were whispering urgently in his ears, pulling him back toward his seat. Finally, Morrison shook them off and stormed out of the mess hall. His buddies followed. The tension broke. Conversations resumed quieter than before. Patterson exhaled slowly. That was either really brave or really stupid. Maybe both, Dory admitted. His hands were shaking with adrenaline. He'd been ready to fight consequences be damned. You know he's going to cause trouble, him and his friends. They're not going to forget this. Good. I don't want them to forget. I want them to remember that they can't push us around anymore. Not after what we did, not after we proved ourselves. You proved yourself, Patterson corrected. The rest of us are still just mess men. For now. But Pi said things are changing. If they are, it's because we made them change, by doing what they said we couldn't do. That night, Dory lay in his bunk and thought about Morrison's anger. It wasn't really about the Navy Cross or the gun or any specific action. It was about fear. Fear that if black sailors could be heroes, could be warriors, could be equals, then the entire structure that kept men like Morrison feeling superior would collapse. That scared some people more than Japanese bombs. But the bombs had already fallen. The structure was already collapsing. The only question was, what would be built in its place? On December 15th, reporters arrived at Pearl Harbor. The Navy had kept the disaster secret for over a week, but now they were allowing limited press access. The story of the attack would be national news, and the Navy wanted to control the narrative. They wanted stories of heroism and resilience, not just devastation and death. A Navy public affairs officer approached Dory in the barracks. Miller, we need you for photographs. Press is here, and they want to document the heroes of Pearl Harbor. Dory followed the officer to a staging area where other decorated sailors were gathering. All of them were white. When Dory arrived, the photographers looked confused. This is Miller, the public affairs officer explained. 4 confirmed air kills, Navy Cross recipient. One photographer trailed off looking uncomfortable. He's a hero, the officer said firmly. Same as everyone else here. Now take the picture. The photographs were awkward. Dory stood at the back of the group, taller than everyone else, but somehow still less visible. The photographers kept adjusting the lineup, moving Dory around, never quite satisfied with the composition. Finally, they settled on a shot with Dory partially obscured by other sailors. Perfect, the photographer said. That'll work. After the photo session, Dory returned to his duties. The West Virginia was being patched up enough to be refloated and moved to dry dock for proper repairs. The work crews needed extra hands. Dory volunteered, grateful for something physical to do, something that kept his mind occupied. He worked alongside Kowalski, the machinist's mate, who'd helped him with the valves. They were hauling damaged equipment up from below decks, twisted metal burned machinery pieces of what had once been a functioning warship. Heard you had trouble with Morrison, Kowalski said, as they dragged a section of destroyed ventilation system across the deck. Word travels fast. Always does. For what it's worth, Morrison's an ass. Most of the guys thought you handled it right. Some think you should have knocked his teeth out. Others think you should have just walked away. Kowalski shrugged. I think you did exactly what you needed to do. Stood your ground without throwing the first punch. That takes more guts than fighting." They worked in silence for a while. Then Kowalski spoke again, his voice more hesitant. "I never really thought about it before. About what it must be like for you guys. The messmen, I mean. Always serving, never fighting. Never getting credit for what you do." He paused. "That's wrong. I can see that now. But I never saw it before." "Most people don't see what they don't want to see," Dory said. "Yeah, but I'm seeing it now, and I'm going to remember it. When this war is over, when we rebuild everything, I'm going to remember that the first person I saw shoot down a Japanese plane was a black sailor who wasn't supposed to be holding a gun. That's going to mean something." Dory hoped he was right, hoped that what happened at Pearl Harbor would crack open doors that had been locked for generations. But hope was a fragile thing, easily crushed by the weight of reality. 3 weeks after the attack on December 29, 1941, Dory received new orders. He was being transferred to the USS Indianapolis, a Portland-class cruiser that had escaped Pearl Harbor undamaged. He'd remain a messman. The Navy wasn't promoting him despite everything, but he'd be on a ship that could still fight. Before he left, he visited the temporary graves at the Halawa Naval Cemetery. Over 400 sailors were buried there, more being added every day as bodies were recovered. He stood in front of one grave marker that read simply, "Unknown Sailor, USS Arizona." "I won't forget," Dory said quietly to the grave. "I'll keep fighting, for you and everyone else who didn't make it out." He saluted the grave, held the salute for a long moment, then turned and walked away. The USS Indianapolis was waiting. The war was waiting. And Doris Miller, still officially a mess attendant, still officially not qualified for combat, still officially less than equal, was ready to show the world again what heroes really looked like. Behind him, Pearl Harbor continued its recovery. Ships were being raised, rebuilt, repaired. The dead were being counted and buried. The wounded were being treated. And slowly, carefully, almost reluctantly, the United States Navy was beginning to ask questions it had never asked before. Questions about who could fight, who could lead, who could be trusted with the defense of the nation. Questions that men like Morrison feared, and men like Dory had been waiting their whole lives to answer. In the heart of military rigidity and racial prejudice and a system built to keep certain men invisible, a mess, attendant had become impossible to ignore. And though the whispers of change were faint, barely audible over the sounds of repair work and preparation for war, they were there, growing stronger, spreading wider. Through barriers of regulation and hate, through the steel walls of discrimination, those whispers still found their way. The USS Indianapolis cut through Pacific waters in January 1942, and Dory Miller was back in the galley, back to serving officers who didn't look at him, back to washing dishes and pressing uniforms. The Navy Cross ceremony hadn't happened yet. There were bureaucratic delays, paperwork to process, approvals to secure. So for now, he was just another messman, as if December 7th had never happened. But the other messmen knew. The crew knew. And they treated him differently. "Miller, you really shoot down 4 planes?" a young mess attendant asked one morning. The kid was 17, fresh from basic training, assigned to mess duty like every other black recruit. "That's what they tell me," Dory said, scrubbing a pot. With no training. The kid was quiet for a moment, processing that. "My recruiter said mess duty was all we could do, said we weren't suited for combat roles." "Your recruiter was wrong. But they still put us here, still got us cooking and cleaning while everyone else fights." The kid's voice carried an edge of bitterness that Dory recognized. He'd felt it himself not so long ago. "For now," Dory said. "But things change. They have to change." When? Dory didn't have an answer for that. He'd hoped Pearl Harbor would be the catalyst, but weeks had passed and nothing had shifted. Black sailors were still restricted to mess duty and steward positions, still forbidden from combat ratings, still treated as less than. On March 17, 1942, the USS Indianapolis pulled into San Francisco for resupply. Shore leave was granted. Dory walked the streets of the city in his dress uniform, the only decoration on his chest a single service ribbon. People passed him without a second glance. Just another sailor. Just another black man in uniform. He found a phone booth and called home. His mother answered on the third ring. "Doris, is that you?" "Hi, Mama." Her voice broke with emotion. Thank God you're alive. We heard about Pearl Harbor and we didn't know they wouldn't tell us anything." "I'm fine, Mama. I'm okay." The newspaper said thousands died. They said the whole fleet was destroyed. Not destroyed, damaged. We're rebuilding. He paused. "Mama, I need to tell you something about what happened that day." He told her everything. About the attack, about the gun, about the planes he'd shot down, about the valves and the rescues and the fires. He'd been holding it in for months, unable to write it all down, unable to process it himself. Now it poured out in a rush. His mother was silent for a long time after he finished. Then she said very quietly, "Your father needs to hear this." His father's voice came on the line, gruff, suspicious. "Doris." "Yes, sir." "Your mother says you're a hero now." "I just did what needed doing." "That's what heroes do." His father's voice softened slightly. "I was wrong, son. When you left, I told you being strong would just make you a target, but you proved me wrong. You showed them what you could do." "I tried to, sir." "And they recognized it. They're promoting you, treating you right." Dory hesitated. "They're giving me a medal, but I'm still mess duty, still the same rating I had before." The silence on the other end was heavy with understanding. "So nothing changed?" "Not yet." "Will it?" "I don't know, sir. I hope so." His father sighed. "Hope is good, son. But hope doesn't fill bellies or change minds. You did something extraordinary and they're still keeping you in the kitchen. That tell you everything you need to know about how they really see us." Dory knew his father was right, but he couldn't accept it, wouldn't accept it. Maybe it takes time, maybe nothing. "You listen to me, Doris." His father's voice grew urgent. "I'm proud of you, prouder than I can say, but don't expect them to treat you fair just because you earned it. The world doesn't work that way, not for men like us." "Then maybe I need to make it work that way." His father laughed a sad, tired sound. "Good luck with that. But be careful. Heroes who push too hard end up dead." They talked for a few more minutes before the operator cut them off. Dory hung up the phone and stood in the booth, his father's words echoing in his head. Heroes who push too hard end up dead. On May 27, 1942, 3.5 months after Pearl Harbor, the Navy finally held the ceremony. Admiral Chester Nimitz himself pinned the Navy Cross on Dory's chest aboard the aircraft carrier USS Enterprise in Pearl Harbor. Photographers captured the moment. Reporters scribbled notes. Other sailors stood at attention, watching. Nimitz shook Dory's hand. "This marks the first time the Navy Cross has been awarded to an enlisted man of the Negro race. Your actions represent the highest traditions of naval service." "Thank you, sir." "The country needs heroes right now, Miller. You've given us one. Don't let us down." "I won't, sir." The ceremony ended. Dory returned to the Indianapolis with a medal on his chest and the same rank he'd had before. Mess Attendant 3rd Class. The photographers had gotten their pictures. The Navy had gotten their propaganda. And Dory had gotten a piece of metal that changed nothing about his actual duties. But something had changed even if the Navy didn't want to acknowledge it. Black newspapers across the country ran the story. The Pittsburgh Courier, the Chicago Defender, the Baltimore Afro-American. They printed photos of Dory with his Navy Cross, wrote articles about the hero the Navy had tried to keep quiet. Black communities celebrated. Black mothers pointed to his picture and told their sons, see what you can be. Letters arrived by the dozens, from black sailors serving on other ships, from families back home, from civil rights leaders who saw Dory's story as proof that segregation and discrimination had no place in the military. One letter came from a lawyer named Thurgood Marshall, who wrote about using Dory's example in court cases challenging military segregation. Dory read every letter, answered as many as he could, but the attention made him uncomfortable. He hadn't fought for recognition or political change. He'd fought because his ship was sinking and his brothers were dying and there was a gun in front of him and an enemy in the sky. "You okay?" Patterson asked one evening, finding Dory on deck staring at the ocean, just thinking about how everything changed and nothing changed. Dory gestured at his uniform. "I've got a Navy Cross now, first black recipient, historic moment, and tomorrow I'll still be serving breakfast and washing dishes like none of it matters." "It matters," Patterson said firmly. "Maybe not to the brass, maybe not to the system, but it matters to every black sailor who sees that medal and realizes we're capable of more than they tell us we are. Is that enough? It has to be. For now." Patterson lit a cigarette, offered one to Dory. Dory declined. "You know what I heard? They're talking about forming all-black gun crews, letting us train on weapons. Nothing official yet, just talk. But that's more than we had before Pearl Harbor." "Talk is cheap." "Sometimes talk is the first step." Patterson exhaled smoke. "You opened a door, Dory. Even if it's just cracked open, even if they're fighting to keep it from opening wider, it's open. Now we have to keep pushing until it swings all the way." Through the summer and fall of 1942, the USS Indianapolis fought in the Pacific Theater, the Battle of the Coral Sea, the Battle of Midway. Dory remained in mess duty, serving officers who discussed strategy over meals he'd prepared, planning battles he'd never be officially allowed to fight in. But when general quarters sounded when the ship came under attack, nobody cared about his rating. He manned whatever gun needed. Manning fought alongside white sailors who'd forgotten to be racist when Japanese planes were diving at their heads. After the Battle of Midway, a young ensign approached Dory in the galley. "Miller, I saw you on the anti-aircraft gun during the attack." "Yes, sir." "That's not your assigned battle station." "No, sir. My station was compromised. I improvised." The ensign studied him. "You're the one from Pearl Harbor, the Navy Cross." "Yes, sir. I read about you. In the papers." The ensign hesitated. "My father says the Navy made a mistake giving you that medal. Says it sends the wrong message about integration." Dory's jaw tightened. "What do you think, sir?" "I think your father's opinion doesn't mean shit when Japanese planes are shooting at me and you're the one keeping them off our ship." The ensign extended his hand. "Thank you for what you did, at Pearl Harbor and here, officially and unofficially." Dory shook his hand. These moments were becoming more common. Individual white sailors, usually younger ones, who'd seen combat and realized that skin color didn't matter when bullets were flying. But individual acceptance wasn't systemic change. The Navy's official policy remained unchanged. In November 1943, Dory received new orders. He was being transferred to the escort carrier, USS Liscombe Bay. It was a smaller ship, less prestigious than the Indianapolis, but it was a combat assignment. He'd still be mess duty, but he'd be in the fight. Before he left the Indianapolis, the crew threw him a send-off. White and black sailors together, drinking illegally in the mess deck, sharing stories and jokes. Kowalski was there, having also transferred to the Indianapolis months earlier. To Miller, Kowalski raised his cup. "The toughest son of a bitch I've ever served with. May the Liscombe Bay treat you well." They drank. Someone started singing. Others joined in. For a few hours, the divisions didn't matter. They were just sailors, brothers in arms, united by shared danger and mutual respect. But the next morning, the divisions reasserted themselves. Dory packed his sea bag, said his goodbyes, and transferred to the Liscombe Bay, knowing that nothing had fundamentally changed. He was still a messman, still restricted, still waiting for the door to open wider. The USS Liscombe Bay was part of Task Force 52, supporting the invasion of the Gilbert Islands in the Central Pacific. The carrier launched bombing runs against Japanese positions on Mackinac Atoll, covering marine landings, providing close air support. Dory served meals and cleaned quarters and waited for his chance to fight. That chance came in the early morning of November 24th, 1943. The Liscombe Bay was steaming with the task force roughly 20 miles southwest of Butaritari. The sun hadn't risen yet. Most of the crew was asleep or just waking. Dory was in the galley starting breakfast prep. The ship's routine was normal, unchanged, peaceful. At 5:13 a.m., a single Japanese torpedo from submarine I-175 struck the Liscombe Bay's stern, detonating the ship's bomb magazine. The explosion was catastrophic, instantaneous. The entire aft section of the ship disintegrated in a fireball visible for miles. The blast tore through bulkheads, vaporized compartments, killed hundreds of men in their bunks. The carrier began sinking immediately, going down by the stern, listing heavily. Dory was thrown across the galley by the blast. The lights went out. Emergency lighting flickered on, then died. In the darkness, he could hear screaming metal, tearing water rushing in. He pulled himself up, felt blood on his face, didn't know if it was his or someone else's. Abandoned ship. The order came over the dying intercom system. All hands, abandoned ship. Dory ran for the ladder to the main deck. The passageway was chaos, men trapped, injured, dying. He grabbed a sailor who was stumbling blind through the smoke, guided him toward the exit. Found another, then another. The ship was going down fast, the angle steepening with every second. He emerged on deck and saw the devastation. The entire stern was gone. Just gone. Replaced by flames and wreckage and empty space. Men were jumping into the water, swimming away from the sinking ship. Life rafts were deploying those that hadn't been destroyed in the blast. Miller helped me. A messman named Jones was trying to free a life raft that had jammed in its housing. Dory ran over, grabbed the mechanism, wrenched it free. The raft deployed, hitting the water. Jones jumped after it. "Come on." Dory looked back at the ship. Men were still trapped inside. He could hear them screaming. The ship was nearly vertical now, stern underwater, bow rising toward the sky. In another minute, she'd be gone. He jumped. The water was cold dark, filled with oil and debris. Dory swam hard away from the suction that would pull him down when the ship sank. Around him, other sailors struggled in the water, some wounded, some burned, some already dead, and floating face down. The life raft was 20 yards away. He swam toward it. Behind him, the USS Liscombe Bay slipped beneath the surface with a sound like the world ending. The suction pulled at him, tried to drag him under. He kicked harder, fought against it, reached the raft just as the ship disappeared completely. Jones pulled him into the raft. Jesus Christ, she's gone. The whole ship's just gone. Dory looked back at where the Liscombe Bay had been. Nothing but burning oil and floating debris. The sun was starting to rise, painting the sky red. Around them, dozens of men floated in the water, calling for help, crying for their mothers, dying slowly from injuries or exposure. "We need to pull them in," Dory said. "As many as we can." They spent the next hour pulling survivors from the water. The life raft was designed for 10 men. They got 20 aboard before it couldn't hold anymore. Men clung to the sides, holding on with whatever strength they had left. Some lost their grip and slipped away into the darkness. Some died in the raft, their wounds too severe. Rescue ships arrived within hours. Destroyers picked up survivors, transferred them to larger vessels. Of the 916 men aboard the Liscombe Bay, only 272 survived. It was the greatest loss of life on an American aircraft carrier in the entire war. Dory sat on the deck of the rescue ship, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun rise fully over the Pacific. Jones sat next to him, also wrapped in a blanket, both of them shivering despite the tropical heat. "We should be dead," Jones said. "By all rights, we should be at the bottom with the others. But we're not. Why us and not them?" Dory didn't have an answer. Survival was random, capricious, cruel in its selectivity. He'd saved men at Pearl Harbor who'd gone on to die in other battles. He'd survived the Liscombe Bay while better men had drowned. There was no logic to it, no justice, no reason. "I don't know," he finally said. "I don't know why we're here, and they're not." 3 days later, the Navy informed him that he was being reassigned to a shore station in San Diego. No explanation given, just orders. He'd survived the war on land, training new recruits far from combat. He never understood if it was because they wanted to protect their decorated hero or because they wanted him out of harm's way, so he couldn't become a symbol in death as well as life. Either way, his fighting days were over. The war continued without him. Black sailors gradually gained more opportunities, not equality, but steps toward it. The Navy began accepting black recruits for general service ratings in 1944. It was progress, slow and grudging, but progress nonetheless. Progress built on foundations that men like Dory had laid with their blood and sacrifice. But for Dory, none of it felt like enough. He'd fought in 2 major actions, earned the Navy Cross, proven himself repeatedly. And he was still just a messman, still waiting for the door to open all the way, still hoping that his example would matter to someone somewhere. He trained recruits in San Diego through 1944 and into 1945, taught them discipline and duty and how to survive in combat. The young black recruits looked at him with awe, seeing his Navy Cross, knowing his story. The white recruits were more mixed, some respectful, some resentful. All of them processing the cognitive dissonance of a decorated war hero who couldn't even eat in the same mess hall as them. And through it all, Dory carried the weight of the Liscombe Bay. The faces of men who died in the water, the screams from inside the sinking ship, the random cruelty of survival. He'd been given chances that others hadn't. He'd lived while hundreds drowned. That guilt never left him. By 1945, victory was close, but countless had already vanished into the depths. Victory came in August 1945 with mushroom clouds over Japan and surrender papers signed on the deck of the USS Missouri. Dory Miller wasn't there to see it. He'd been training recruits in San Diego when the news came through. Japan had surrendered, the war was over. The killing could finally stop. The base erupted in celebration. Sailors cheered, threw their caps in the air, embraced each other without regard to rank or race. For one brief moment, the joy of survival erased all divisions. Dory stood in the training yard, watching young men celebrate, feeling strangely empty. He should be happy. He was alive. America had won. But all he could think about were the faces of men who weren't there to celebrate, the sailors from the West Virginia, the crew of the Liscombe Bay, all the brothers who died so this moment could happen. A young recruit approached him, still grinning from ear to ear. "Chief Miller, we won. We actually won." Dory had been promoted to Chief Petty Officer in late 1944. Finally, after 3 years of being a decorated war hero stuck in mess duty, the Navy had given him a rank that reflected his contributions. It was too little too late, but it was something. "We won," Dory agreed, but his voice carried no celebration. The recruit's smile faltered. "Aren't you happy, Chief?" "I'm happy it's over, happy the dying stops. But I keep thinking about the men who aren't here. The ones who won't get to go home, won't get to see their families, won't get to have lives." Dory looked at the young man. "You make it through the whole war." "Yes, Chief. Never saw combat. Spent the whole war stateside." "Then you're lucky. Luckier than you know." Dory's voice softened. "Go celebrate. You earned it just by serving. But remember the ones who didn't make it. Don't let their sacrifice become just another story." The recruit nodded solemnly and walked away. Dory remained in the training yard as the celebration continued around him, feeling like a ghost at his own life's party. The transition to peacetime was chaotic. Millions of servicemen needed to be demobilized, sent home, reintegrated into civilian society. The Navy began processing discharges based on a point system, length of service, combat experience, decorations, dependents. Dory had enough points to get out immediately if he wanted. But where would he go? Back to Waco, back to cotton fields and segregation, and the same limited options he'd fled in 1939. He stayed in, re-enlisted for another term. The Navy was the only place where he'd ever been seen as something more than his skin color, even if that recognition was grudging, incomplete, conditional. It was more than civilian Texas would ever give him. In September 1945, he was transferred to the Great Lakes Naval Training Station in Illinois to continue training recruits. The base was integrating slowly, reluctantly. Black and white sailors still lived in separate barracks, ate in separate mess halls, but they trained together now. It was progress of a kind. One afternoon, Dory was leading a class on damage control when a white recruit raised his hand. "Chief, is it true you shot down 4 Japanese planes at Pearl Harbor with no training?" "It's true." How did you know what to do?" Dory thought about that morning, the chaos, the fear, the desperate need to do something. I watched other gunners during drills, paid attention even though I wasn't supposed to touch the weapons. When the moment came, I remembered what I'd seen and I did my best. He paused. But I'll tell you what really made the difference. It wasn't skill or training, it was refusal. Refusal, Chief. I refused to accept that I was supposed to just stand there and die, refused to accept that my life didn't matter enough to fight for, refused to let the enemy kill my brothers without fighting back. Dory's voice grew stronger. They told me I couldn't fight. I refused to believe them. That's the most important thing I can teach you when someone tells you what you can't do. You get to decide whether to accept that or prove them wrong. The recruit nodded slowly, processing. Around the classroom, other young sailors, black and white, were listening intently. Dory realized he was teaching them more than damage control procedures. He was teaching them about dignity, about refusing to be diminished, about standing up even when the world tells you to stay down. After class, another recruit approached a black sailor from Alabama who'd been quiet throughout the lesson. "Chief Miller, can I ask you something personal?" "Go ahead." "Do you think things will really change after the war? They keep saying we proved ourselves, that integration is coming, that everything will be different. But I've heard that before. After World War I, they said the same things. Then the black soldiers came home and got lynched for wearing their uniforms." Dory knew the history, knew about the Red Summer of 1919, about black veterans murdered by white mobs who couldn't tolerate the idea of black men with military training and dignity. The recruit's skepticism was earned. "I don't know if things will change," Dory said honestly. "I hope they will. I've seen individual people change, white sailors who fought beside black sailors and realized we're the same. But whether that translates to real change in society, that's up to people like us. We have to keep pushing, keep demanding, keep refusing to accept less than we deserve. Even if it gets us killed. Especially then." Dory's voice was firm. "Because if we don't push, if we just accept whatever scraps they throw us, nothing will ever change. Our children will face the same discrimination we did. Our grandchildren too. The only way forward is through resistance, not violent resistance necessarily, but moral resistance. Refusing to be invisible, refusing to be silent, refusing to accept that second-class citizenship is good enough." The recruit looked at him with something like awe. "You're not just a war hero, Chief. You're a different kind of fighter." "I'm the same kind. I just realized the fight doesn't end when the shooting stops." Through late 1945 and into 1946, Dory continued training recruits while watching the country struggle with its returning servicemen. The integration of the military remained incomplete, inconsistent, resisted by many in leadership. President Truman would eventually issue Executive Order 9981 in 1948, mandating desegregation of the armed forces. But in 1946, that future was still uncertain. Dory received letters from black sailors he'd trained, telling him about their experiences. Some found opportunities in the post-war Navy. Others faced the same old discrimination, just in new forms. One letter came from Patterson, who'd survived the war and was trying to make a career in the Navy. "They're still keeping us out of most ratings," Patterson wrote. "Still treating us like we're only good for service work. I've got 5 years of combat experience and they won't let me advance. I'm thinking about getting out, but I don't know what's waiting for me in civilian life. At least in the Navy, I occasionally get treated like a real sailor. Back home, I'm just another who needs to know his place. What do I do?" "Dory, what's the right answer?" Dory sat with that letter for a long time before responding. He wanted to tell Patterson that everything would be fine, that the Navy would recognize his worth, that America would embrace its black veterans. But he couldn't lie. "There's no easy answer," he finally wrote back. "You have to decide what you can live with and what you can't. Staying in means continuing to fight against a system that doesn't want to change. Getting out means facing a civilian world that might be even worse. Either way, you'll be fighting. The only question is which battlefield you choose. Whatever you decide, remember that your service mattered. The men you fought beside know what you're worth, even if the system doesn't." In March 1947, Dory received notification that the Navy was naming a destroyer escort after him, the USS Miller hull number DE-1091. He would be the first black sailor to have a ship named in his honor while still alive. The Navy made a ceremony of it, invited press, positioned it as proof of their commitment to integration and equality. Dory attended the ceremony at the Boston Navy Yard. Officials gave speeches about progress and brotherhood. Reporters asked him how it felt to be honored this way. He gave them the answers they wanted to hear: grateful, honored, proud. But inside, he felt the same emptiness he'd felt on VJ Day. A ship with his name, a medal on his chest, the respect of individual sailors. But the system itself remained fundamentally unchanged. Black sailors were still restricted, still discriminated against, still fighting for basic dignity. His heroism had opened a door, but the door kept trying to close, and the people pushing to keep it open were exhausted. After the ceremony, an older black man approached him. The man was in his 60s, walked with a cane, wore a World War I veteran's pin on his lapel. "Chief Miller, I wanted to shake your hand." Dory shook it. "Thank you, sir. I fought in France in 1918. Came home expecting things to change. They didn't. 30 years later, you young men fought again. And I see they're still making you fight for basic respect." The old veteran's eyes were sad. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry we didn't do enough to change things for your generation." "You did what you could, sir, just like we're doing what we can." "Is it enough, though? Will your children have to fight the same battles?" Dory looked at the ship bearing his name floating in Boston Harbor. "I don't know. But I know we can't stop fighting. If we do everything we suffered for means nothing." The old veteran nodded. "Keep fighting then, and maybe, God willing, your children will live in a better world than we did." They stood together watching the USS Miller, two generations of black servicemen connected by shared struggle and uncertain hope. Through 1947 and 1948, Dory remained in the Navy training recruits, pushing for change where he could, fighting small battles against institutional racism. He wasn't naive. He knew real change would take decades, maybe generations. But he also knew that every small victory mattered. Every black sailor who got promoted, every white officer who learned to see past skin color, every regulation that got revised, they all added up to something larger. In 1948, President Truman signed Executive Order 9981, mandating full integration of the armed forces. The change was slow, met with resistance, but it was official policy now. Dory watched younger black sailors access opportunities that had been closed to him, saw them train as pilots and gunners and officers, and felt a bittersweet satisfaction. The door he'd helped crack open was finally swinging wider, but he also knew the cost, knew how many men had died waiting for change that came too late, knew how much potential had been wasted by a system too stubborn to see value in all its people. In 1952, at age 32, Dory Miller retired from the Navy after 13 years of service. He'd achieved the rank of Chief Petty Officer, earned the Navy Cross, had a ship named after him, trained thousands of sailors. He'd proven himself 100 times over, and he was tired. He returned to Waco, Texas, the place he'd left as a desperate 19-year-old looking for something better. The town had changed some. Still segregated, still difficult, but changed. His parents were older. His father's back more bent. His mother's hair gray. They welcomed him home with tears and pride. "You did good, son," his father said. "Better than I ever imagined." Dory looked at the cotton fields he'd worked as a child, still there, still being worked by black families who didn't own the land. "Did I, though I fought in a war for freedom while black people back home still couldn't vote, couldn't eat in certain restaurants, couldn't drink from certain water fountains? What did I actually accomplish?" "You showed them what we're capable of," his mother said firmly. "You proved that the limitations they put on us are lies. That matters, Doris. That matters more than you know." "Does it? Because I look around and I see the same old Waco, same old Texas, same old country that doesn't want to change." "Change is coming," his father said. "Slow, but coming. And it's coming because men like you refuse to stay in your place. You kicked down doors, made them see us differently. That's not nothing." Dory wanted to believe that. Wanted to believe his 23 minutes at Pearl Harbor had meant something beyond the immediate tactical victory. Wanted to believe the years of fighting discrimination while serving his country had moved the needle somehow. In the years that followed, he worked various jobs around Waco, never quite finding his place in civilian life, the way he'd found it in the Navy. He married, had no children, lived quietly. Occasionally, reporters would track him down for anniversary stories about Pearl Harbor. He'd tell them about December 7th, about the gun, about the planes. He gave them good quotes about bravery and duty, but he never told them about the emptiness, about feeling like a symbol instead of a person, about wondering if his sacrifice had actually changed anything meaningful. In 1973, the Navy commissioned a Knox-class frigate named USS Miller, replacing the destroyer Escort. In 2020, they announced plans for a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, the USS Doris Miller CVN-81, scheduled for completion in the 2030s. The most advanced warship ever built would carry the name of a man who'd once been told he wasn't good enough to touch a gun. Dory didn't live to see either of those ships. He passed away in his sleep in 1991, at age 71, in the same small house in Waco where he'd grown up. The local paper ran a small obituary. The Navy sent a delegation to his funeral. They played taps, folded a flag, presented it to his widow. But his story didn't end there. It couldn't end there. In the decades after his death, Doris Miller became what he'd always been reluctant to be in life: a symbol. A representation of courage under fire, of fighting despite being told you couldn't, of refusing to accept the limitations others tried to impose. Schools were named after him. Statues were erected. His face appeared in museum exhibits and history books. And slowly, painfully, incrementally, the military he'd served became more integrated, more equal, more willing to recognize merit, regardless of skin color. Black officers commanded ships and air wings. Black admirals led fleets. Black sailors served in every rating, every specialty, every corner of the Navy he'd helped change. The door he'd cracked open in 23 minutes of fury at Pearl Harbor had finally swung all the way open. It had taken decades. It had required the sacrifice and struggle of thousands of men and women. It remained imperfect, incomplete, always needing to be defended against those who wanted to close it again. But it was open. Years after his death, a young black naval officer stood on the bridge of a destroyer, commanding a crew of all races, looking out at the Pacific Ocean where Doris Miller had once fought. She'd grown up hearing his story, had been inspired by his example, had joined the Navy because of what he'd proven was possible. She thought about the mess attendant who'd manned a gun he wasn't trained to fire, about the hero who'd been forced back into the kitchen after proving himself in combat, about the man who'd kept fighting even when the system kept pushing him down. And she understood that his 23 minutes of combat weren't the whole story. The whole story was a lifetime of resistance, fighting not just Japanese planes, but American racism, not just enemy torpedoes, but institutional discrimination, not just for tactical victory, but for fundamental human dignity. The waves continued their endless rhythm against the ship's hull. The sun rose over the same waters where the USS West Virginia had burned, where the USS Liscombe Bay had sank, where Doris Miller had proven that heroism had no color and courage needed no permission. They'd tried to keep him invisible. He'd refused. They'd tried to limit his potential. He'd exceeded it anyway. They'd tried to make him small. He'd become immense, not through seeking glory, but through simply refusing to accept that he was anything less than fully human, fully capable, fully worthy. His name lives on warships and monuments. His face appears in museums and textbooks. His story inspires new generations of sailors who'll never face quite the same barriers he did, thanks to battles he fought. But perhaps his greatest legacy is simpler than all that. Perhaps it's just this: he showed up. He stood up. He refused to back down. And in doing so, he reminded America that its ideals of freedom and equality meant nothing if they weren't extended to everyone who fought for them. The door he opened remains open, but it remains open only because people remember his sacrifice and choose to defend what he fought for. If you believe his name deserves to be remembered, share this story. And in the comments below, write the name of someone you know who fought for dignity, who refused to be diminished, who stood up when others said to stay down. Because Doris Miller's story isn't just history, it's a continuing call to courage that echoes across generations, reminding us that heroes aren't born. They're made in moments when ordinary people decide that enough is enough, that they will not be silent, that they will stand and fight, even when victory seems impossible. His 23 minutes changed the Navy forever. What will your moment be?